Good to see you here on Zoom today. Now, before we get going, we just want to take a minute to pause and reflect because it has been a hard week for this nation. We started this book club when the pandemic had just hit the United States, and just this week we passed that mile marker of 100,000 deaths, and it's just a loss that I can't even calculate. It's a lot to wrap our heads around. And of course, I'm sure you've seen the violent acts of racism in Minnesota and this week and recently in places like Georgia and Kentucky. So we just want to pause as a group to reflect and pray together. So I will turn it over to Mitch. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Tori, and thank you all for being here today. You know, as I was thinking this morning, I actually just wrote an op-ed about it. It really struck my mind that how we do need to be in mourning for the 100,000 and continuing to grow people who have died from COVID-19. But I'd also like to think it out as not only do I want to mourn those people, I want to also ask us to think about how we can grieve for the 200,000 people that die every year from air pollution in this nation, and how actually the two of those are interconnected, because it's becoming more and more clear that people with compromised pulmonary systems are much more susceptible to the severest effects of COVID-19. And certainly, we as a nation are not following the love of Jesus Christ very well. It is unconscionable to me, and obviously we don't know all the circumstances of what happened in Minnesota other than the tape, which most of us viewed. But still, any form of racism or unloving against any person is not of God. And no matter if we have differences of opinion with maybe on their sexual orientation, or even if they're non-Christians, or even if they're not pro-life as I am, we are commanded to love. And so I'm going to just stop and let you think and maybe pray to yourself for 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'll open us up in a word of prayer. Holy God, you proclaim yourself as love, and you have commanded us to love one another. But Lord, we have so far fallen short of that as a people, as a nation. And Lord, we just ask for your forgiveness for our nation, for those who have died because of their ethnicity or their beliefs or their even understanding of themselves. And Lord, we mourn for the 100,000 people who have died in our nation alone, plus so many more around the world. But Lord, as we reflect upon our mourning, may we do as David did and take the time needed to sit in sackcloth, to cry in the ashes, but then empowered by his faith in you to get up and to move forward. Because ultimately, Lord, that's what we're about, is about uniting the whole world unto you, into your kingdom. So Lord, help us to mourn, help us to grieve, but then, Lord, fill us with your love, that we may go forward and act against violence, against hatred, against pollution, and be your children, your disciples, and share your love. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks everyone for this time of prayer and reflection, and I just hope that we continue as a book club and as believers in our own community to have these conversations and pray with and for people. So now we will turn it over to our regularly scheduled book club programming, and I will pass it over to the wonderful Beth, who will introduce our speaker for today. Take it away, Beth.
Thank you so much, Tori, and thank you once again for your great leadership on all issues that we face as a country. it has certainly been a heartbreaking week. And this morning, as I was doing my daily devotional, it was really interesting because I kept on coming across all these magnificent verses in Psalms that talks about how if God cares for the cows on 1,000 hills, how he cares for us, and how we don't need to be concerned for things to provide. But that doesn't take away from the fact that our hearts are absolutely broken over what is happening. There's been so many stories of wonderful resiliency with us humans, but we are also people who are full of sin. So once again, thank you, Mitch. So today I'm very excited because a lot of y'all have not had an opportunity to really get to know our latest EEN staff member. She is the Senior Director of Policy. She has a Ph.D. from Georgia Tech, so being from Atlanta, we're sort of excited about that. And so without further ado, we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, and Dr. Jessica Moerman is going to lead us in the discussion today, and then Tori will send us out to small groups as usual. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks for this lovely introduction. And again, yeah, it's great to connect with a fellow Atlantean. And first, I just wanted to also commend and congratulate everyone for making it to what I think is week 8 of the book club, and just so thrilled to journey with you guys. We are in the last chapter of the book, even though it's chapter 3, since we started at chapter 4. We're in that last chapter now, and as Tori and Beth will clue us in after our question time today, we're not done yet. We still have one more week to go, and a week of not necessarily book reading, but of activation and beginning to contextualize and personalize what we have been discussing each week together in your own personal story. But today we are in chapter 3 of Caring for Creation, called A Healthy Dose of Skepticism. And as Beth said, I come to EEN from a scientific background. I am a climate scientist and have done years of research before coming to EEN. And so this is why I just love this chapter, and it really hits home for me. And one of the questions that Paul poses is, why trust scientists? And just as he notes that the question about the failures in the 7-day weathercast, the 7-day outlook, really stung and hurt his heart, I'll say that this question of why to trust scientists stings my heart a little bit. But what Paul writes is really true about scientists. Scientists, I can tell you from personal experience, we are not rich. We are not driving Lamborghinis, but we're also the ultimate skeptics. And that's really important to keep in mind in this discussion about climate change, discussions about the impacts of environmental pollution, that questions that you may have yourselves, that you may be fielding from others in your community, from family and friends, as you share these topics with them. I think it's really important to remember that first and foremost, scientists are the ones who are rigorously and sometimes mercifully, no mercy on each other, picking each other apart, picking our ideas, our theories apart to search for what is accurate and true. And this is really the foundation of science, is we have built up so many robust systems to pick each other apart without mercy. During, you may have read in studies that have come out about the coronavirus, you may have seen a phrase used that it has undergone peer review, or this is yet to undergo peer review. And so these findings are provisional. Peer review is the system that we've set up, that anytime a scientific study comes out and wants to be published, it has to be sent to a board of experts in that field to be reviewed and picked apart, and where there are problems, where there are flaws, that those will be addressed and corrected. And I have participated personally in this peer review process. And I can tell you that as a peer reviewer, we are not very kind. We are often very grumpy. We want to find every flaw. And so this is a process that then, if the authors of that study, if the researchers can't address those flaws, it gets sent back. They have to do everything over, respond to all our comments, and it's not accepted for publication until everything checks out to the best of our knowledge at the time. And so that's whenever you can take some real weight with you when hearing about the scientific consensus that 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening, that it's caused by us, and that it's bad, and that we need to address it. You can take that weight of this peer review system to heart, that this is actually, as Paul says, a big deal, that 97% of the scientific community has come around to that conclusion. And it's actually been shown that sharing that fact when discussing climate change with your friends and family actually makes a difference in helping people understand and trust the information that you are giving them. Another thing that I want to point out is that there are, however, limits to science. And this is what we discussed a bit in chapter 5 on faith in science. But I just want to stop and point out that science limits itself to a very narrow scope, the scope of the natural world, and a narrow set of questions like what, where, how did something happen, when did something happen. It often doesn't address the big questions. If I pull up my screen, some of the questions that science is not well designed to answer and stays outside the scope of are questions like, who are we? Where are we? What is our purpose? And what should we do about certain topics? What should we do about climate change? How do we address that? Those are questions that really then go into the realm of morality, of ethics, and very much in the realm of our faith and our religion. And so I just want to point out that science has gives some powerful truths, but it has limits and doesn't answer everything. And so there is a very strong role for our faith in these discussions that science just can't answer. So one of the questions, however, that science can help answer, that Paul addresses in the book, is what if climate change today? Is it a natural cycle? Is this just another thing that's happening in Earth's history, or is this something different? And this is a question that I love to get because it falls into my particular flavor of science, which is paleoclimatology. And so I've spent the past 15 years before coming to EEN studying why and how Earth's history, Earth's climate has changed throughout its past using the rock record. And we indeed have seen that climate has changed dramatically over Earth's history, as you can see in the photos here. And a big question, especially with today, is what changed? How did climate change? What caused it to change in the past, and is that different from today? And just for sake of time, I'm gonna breeze through this a little bit, but as Paul mentions, there's several different sources, that common culprits that scientists typically look at when trying to figure out past climate change. And these are just a couple. I think we're safe to say that an asteroid impact is not happening today. This is not the source of today's climate change. But other sources, as Paul mentioned, the ice age cycles, the sun cycles, what role does that have to play? And for sake of time, I'm just going to breeze through these charts and graphs a bit quickly. But if we look at the ice age cycle, this is a chart from looking at a record from ancient ice cores in the polar glaciers. And we can see that what I want to point out, for pretty much the whole range of human civilization, the past several thousand years, we have been in a nice warm period with temperatures up here. And then over the most recent 1,000 years, you can see that we have begun a very slow, very gradual cooling over the past couple years. But then in the last 150 years, we've seen this rapid warming. So if we were just part of the natural ice age cycle, we would actually be heading towards cooler temperatures slowly, slowly, slowly towards another ice age. But instead we see this rapid warming. So we can rule out the ice age cycle with that. What about the sun? So here's a chart of temperature rise over the past 150 years. You can see it going up towards the 2000s. This is a graph of the intensity of the sun over that same period, measured by the number of sunspots we see. And what a trend I want to point out is that at the beginning of the record, it does look like the sun and temperatures are going up a bit in lockstep, but then since the 1960s, the intensity of the sun has been decreasing while temperatures continue to rise. And so we can show that the sun is not responsible for our increasing temperatures and global warming that we see today. As Paul mentioned, the other culprit that we always look to in paleoclimate for causing past climate change is carbon dioxide of CO2, a heat trapping gas. Could this be at play? And then just to show you again, in blue, we have a curve, the record of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere taken from measurements as well as from the ice cores. And we see that as it is continuing to rise, just as temperatures are rising. So then it lends the question, okay, if CO2 is responsible for the climate change today, where is that carbon dioxide coming from? And Paul addresses that, talking about, mentions volcanic activity as a source of CO2. And as he notes that, surprisingly, the amount of CO2 released from Florida is more than that of the annual release from volcanic activity. And actually, if you look on the short time scale of a single volcanic eruption like we're seeing today, these actually act to cool the earth by releasing ash and other dust particles that reflect the sun from reaching earth. And so a single volcanic activity, unlike the other times when volcanoes caused big changes in the past, where you saw massive volcanism across the entire world that we would definitely notice if that was happening today, the single volcanic eruptions that we see today actually act to cool the earth. And so the other then source that we look at is fossil fuels and the burning of gas and coal and oil, releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. And I won't go through this fingerprint, that Paul mentions this, that we can fingerprint where the CO2 is actually coming from, whether it's volcanoes or from fossil fuels. This is a quick graph of that. For sake of time, we're just gonna breeze through it, but what I'll just say is that for in the past, so this is the gold is the chemical fingerprint of whether the carbon dioxide is coming from volcanoes or from fossil fuels. We see, and then in black, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We see that these have been relatively stable for the last, in Earth's most recent history, staying in their lanes until around the 1850s. Carbon dioxide is going up in black. The chemical fingerprint that is more like the fossil fuels and going away from the volcanoes is going down at the same time. This again is kind of that smoking gun, that it's not volcanoes, that it is our natural source of CO2. It is from our use of fossil fuels. So just real quickly, we see that the carbon dioxide is coming from our use of fossil fuels. And this is actually good news. It is good news that it's coming from our activities and not from any of these natural culprits from the past, climate change, of natural climate change in the past. And to put this in context, it's good news because for pretty much all of human history, the relationship between climate and humans has been that climate has impacted our human civilization, our ability to thrive. When the climate changes, it's put pressure and stress on us as humans of how do we adapt in that new situation. But for the first time in human history, we flipped the script, and now it is us who is impacting the climate, causing it to change with our activities. And this is good news, because since it is us, we then have the power to change it, to begin to halt what is happening and correct our actions. And this isn't to say, I love how Paul points out that fossil fuels aren't all bad. They have been responsible for, as he says, powering our economies and lifting so many in the world, ourselves included, out of a life of poverty. There's been good things about it. But just like with medicine, you've got to get the right dosage. And right now with CO2, we have overshot the recommended dose and are now headed into harmful territory. But one thing I always love to point out is that when talking about this is that we have a huge toolbox and weapons in our arsenal to stop this, while still maintaining a stable, resilient, lifting people out of poverty through the technology that we have, through renewable energy. So the thing I always like to remind, and the good news that we also have, is that we have the technology, we have the know-how to begin to transition to cleaner energy sources that can still address can still do all those good things that fossil fuels have done in the past of bringing prosperity. But the only problem that we do have, it's not a technological problem, it's a social problem. It's us deciding, are we going to do the hard yards and get creative and innovative also in creating a better world. And I love how Paul ends the chapter of talking about we will be asked by the generations, our kids, grandkids, generations to come, when did we know and what did we do about it? And again, we have the tools necessary to change it, to make a difference, to make a brighter future. We just have to decide to use them. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Beth and Tori and answer any questions if we have time. Thanks, everyone.
Well, Jessica, you certainly did not disappoint. Thank you so much. I just want you to know that I have sat through so many presentations, and you get the award for best graphs ever from a scientist, because normally it's like, what? But you did an excellent job, so thank you very much. We do have some questions, and then Tori and I, before we go to small groups, we have a little homework we want to have for folks in preparation for next week. So the first question comes from Mitch, which I love, and he's like, why does the ocean store so much of the carbon? Like, I know this is something they've just recently discovered, but can you explain what's going on with that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I'll try my best to answer it real quickly. But this is also in connection to the climate pause, the warming pause that that Paul addresses in this, that where did the heat go? Where did the carbon go that caused temperatures to increase at a less rapid rate for a couple years in the early 2000s. And that is because of of ocean, what we call ocean ventilation. And so there are currents in our Earth's oceans that are just moving water and moving heat around the entire globe through these ocean currents. And what that role is that the ocean has a higher heat capacity. Water has a higher heat capacity. It can hold more heat than the atmosphere, and it holds onto it longer, and then it can redistribute it through the currents, the ocean circulation, to colder places, taking it from the surface waters, taking it down to the deep ocean, which is a lot colder than up here on the surface. And so it has a big store, a big bucket, a lot of capacity to hold that heat, and the ocean currents are bringing it down. And so it's when it comes to the climate pause, it didn't really pause anywhere, or it didn't pause throughout the entire globe. That heat was going down into the ocean, and we just weren't measuring it, or at least the news about it wasn't getting out as broadly as the news about temperatures in the air at the surface. Lots of scientists were paying attention to it. It's just that it didn't make the headlines like the atmospheric surface temperatures typically do. So yeah, it's because of that ocean circulation and the high capacity for the ocean to store the heat down in the deep ocean that is making it able to store so much heat.
Super. Thank you so much, Jessica. The next question is, I have to put my glasses on to read it. Can you comment on carbon isotope and what that does in regards to fossil fuels and the contribution to carbon?
Yeah, and again, that was kind of with the graph that I showed, and so that may have cleared it up. And it looks like, yes, it may have, but yeah, I will say I'm an isotope geochemist, and so that's my jam, those isotopes. And I'll just share that isotopes are, I'm going to be quick about this because I could talk about isotopes all day, but an isotope is just, it's an atom, of atoms. Isotopes just have one more extra particle that doesn't do anything except for give it a little bit more weight. And it is because of that little extra particle that we can figure out that causes different elements to distribute differently throughout the Earth system, and allows us then to study all of these things in the past before we had weather stations. It reveals all these incredible clues about Earth's history, and it's just the elegance of that little difference in weight of our atoms that gives us so much information. And just personally, it's one of those things that makes me just go, wow, God, you made a magnificent world, and it is our joy to discover more about it. And I've just discovered so much about his magnificence through the isotopes. So I'm glad you asked about them.
Okay, so John had another question, and I'm going to take a little liberty, since we have sort of smaller group today, that we're going to go a little longer because we've got so many great questions. So can you please comment on niche construction and what role that might be playing in our behavior in relation to climate change?
Ooh, I don't know too much about niche construction. So maybe if you want to clarify that in the chat, but maybe as it comes to biodiversity and what roles different species play, because there are a lot of feedbacks between biology, species, plants, animals that impact this in such a, impact the climate system and the Earth system in really unique ways. So would love to, if you give me some more context later, would love to answer that in an email.
And then Alice asked us to share the slides, and of course we will do that afterwards. Look for an email in the next couple of days from Tori. Larry is asking, would you address the tilt of the Earth and long-term cycle arguments for climate skeptics?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, this is really amazing. I love this. This is talking about the ice age cycles that are caused by the Earth's tilt. There's also two other flavors of how close the Earth is to the sun, whether its orbit is more circular or more elliptical, and how the Earth then is in, how close then, if it's a circular or an elliptical orbit, how close is it to the sun? The tilt gives us these really interesting things with interactions then with the seasons, causing monsoon cycles. I could go on and on about this, but for skeptics, I think one really powerful thing to talk to them about ice age cycles, tilt, all of how climate has changed in the past, is that it is incredibly regular and predictable. We know these patterns so well that we can use our computer models to predict deep into the past, and then and then test that against the rock record from the climate records to see, okay, how well is our understanding of how the tilt and the orbit and our closeness to the sun, and then how much heat we get, how much does that really relate and match up with our climate changes in climate. And we see that we can nail this down so well against the rock record. That then gives us a lot of confidence then moving towards how much confidence do we have in our projections about how ice age cycles are going to happen in the future, and whether that we truly are following a natural ice age cycle right now with the current warming, or whether we're not. We have a lot of confidence in where we should be heading if things would just, if the Earth system was to be able to move forward naturally on its own. And we see that we're moving in the opposite direction, and that it very much is not, the warming that we see today very much is not caused by the tilt and responsible for the ice age cycles.
Great. So the next question is KV said she didn't quite understand how the ice age graph works. Do you mind reviewing that quickly?
Sure. Okay, let me bring that up. All right. Hopefully everyone, did I share my screen? No, I did not. Let's try this again. Okay, I think I'm sharing now. So what we have here is, this is the last 10,000 years of Earth's history. And one thing to note is that 10,000 years ago really is the rise of human civilization as we know it, with our agriculture systems and coming together in cities. All of that came to rise and thrive over this warm period over the last 10,000 years. And you'll see that things are fairly stable temperature-wise. So here on the y-axis, you probably can't see my pointer, my mouse that I'm trying to point to, but on the up and down, you'll see that it's warmer temperatures relative to the average from 1961 to 1990, or colder. And so you'll see that for the past last 10,000 years, we've been in this warmer period, pretty stable, a really nice environment to live in and to thrive in. And then just, you'll see starting about 4,000 years ago, we are slowly cooling. And I just want to, the rate of change, the rate of cooling, you can see compared to then the rapid warming of the last 150 years, very, very, very different. So it's true that just, you know, by tweaking, just adding a little bit more of CO2, of heat trapping gases, just a little bit of a correction is probably helpful in helping us stay in that warming scenario and not launching into another ice age. But again, that's over a very slow amount of time. We're talking thousands. These are on they're thousands and thousands of years, very long, very slow. So a little bit could be helpful, but we have completely overshot the right dosage for doing something like that. And our warming, the warming that we see over the past 150 years, I mean, it's like a straight shot up compared to what you see as that very gradual curve over the last 10,000 years. And so those are the things that we really look at of, wow, we have not seen this in the natural record, something happening this quickly. And so that is another clue that not only is it in the wrong direction, the warming, but it is also at just unprecedented pace. So I hope that answers, helps clear things up.
And like we've already previously stated, we will make sure that you get copies of these slides. I want copies of these slides because I am telling you, best graphs from a scientist ever, really, trust me on this. So Susan, thank you so much for your question, but we are out of time. And so before we go to small groups, I want to quickly shift over to Tori to tell us a little bit about the homework we're going to have to prepare for next week. Next week will be our last week of book club. It makes me very sad because I have enjoyed this, and I know the rest of the staff has enjoyed this time together too. So Tori, you want to let people know what we want to do to prepare for next week, and then we'll let you send us to small groups.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Jessica, for the wonderful presentation. Sorry, all my windows are open and it got very loud outside. Can everyone hear me all right? It's like
Yes.
construction. I'm so sorry. It literally just happened. So you're probably wondering, hey, the book's over, but we're meeting. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to transition a little bit from reading to writing. So next week, Beth and I are preparing all sorts of great things to talk to you about when it comes to how to take all this knowledge, these discussions that we've had, and translate it into action. But one thing I'd love us to prepare for next week is what I'm calling our creation care story. At Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, we call this our climate testimony, but it's basically a short story, an elevator pitch about why you care about caring for God's creation. And it's a way to start conversation and invite other people into the movement. And yeah, it's really just a way to start conversation. As we've learned throughout the book, stories are really impactful when it comes to talking about this with people who perhaps may be more skeptical. So this afternoon, I'm going to send out a little journaling worksheet. You don't have to share that worksheet with anyone. But when we come back to breakout rooms, we're going to give our elevator pitch, our creation care story, to our group members, just as a chance to practice presenting it and to get feedback for how it's received. And so there's going to be 3 questions. Again, this will be on the journal sheet, so don't worry about writing it down. But we're going to be asking, why do you care about creation care? What are you doing in response to the climate crisis and environmental problems? And what is your hope and prayer for the church in our world? So it's talking about why you care about this, including some scripture and offering some hope moving forward.